On this edition of the News Review, China says its decision to expel American journalists is a countermeasure against Washington's oppression of Chinese media. The Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman lashed out at the United States for what he called endorsing wrongful remarks from American media. Deng Xiaoping urged the White House to set aside ideological prejudice and Cold War mentality. He said if the U.S. goes down the wrong path, China will have to take further measures. Beijing has said it would expel American journalists working for three major American newspapers, namely the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. Earlier this month, Washington imposed limitations on the number of Chinese citizens who could work for Chinese media on American soil. Well, joining us on this edition of the News Review, we have our correspondent Stephen Rebay, who's joining us from Beijing. Also joining us is investigative journalist Tony Gosling. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. Let's start off with Stephen Rebay in Beijing. Talk to us more about the recent measures announced by Beijing.
Well, it started last month when the United States said it would henceforth be regarding Chinese journalists who work for 5 Chinese media outlets as diplomats. It said it would henceforth be regarding these organizations within America as foreign missions. It's easy to understand why America did this. These are state-controlled media organizations. So what's someone who gathers information and gives it to a foreign government? Well, that's a spy. Or you could say that because they work for the Chinese government, they're in the business of creating propaganda, plain and simple. Anyway, China quickly responded to that by expelling 3 journalists working for the Wall Street Journal. Ostensibly, it said that was because of a very upsetting column that the Wall Street Journal published calling China the real sick man of Asia. And after that, America went one step further to its initial action, and it reduced the number of Chinese journalists working for 4 big state-owned media organizations within the USA from 160 to 100. So the most recent Chinese measure can be seen plain and simple as a response to that. And to underline that, what it's actually done is it said in addition to these 3 newspapers that you mentioned, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, it's also going to place a stringent audit on another 2 American media outlets, and those are the Voice of America and Time magazine, and get them to give a detailed explanation of their finances, their personnel, their assets, and so forth. So it's very clearly a retaliation. It's a tit-for-tat measure. Mike Pompeo, characteristically, has said, well, it's not. You can't equate what the Chinese have done for what we've done, because the Chinese are in the business of propaganda, whereas our media are not. Now, if I can be subjective here and give my own opinion, I invite my listeners to just go to Google News, Google China, and you'll see it's just wall-to-wall hostile coverage of China these days. I think Iran is very used to this. It's almost like a joke. If you can take one step back and be objective about this, it's wall-to-wall just China bashing in the same way that it's normally wall-to-wall Iran bashing. And the general narrative is that China does not play by the rules. China's government is an evil dictatorship that doesn't play by the rules, and because of this, there will be a comeuppance. And the Wall Street Journal column was actually nothing unusual. I read it a number of times, and it was exactly the same as you'd expect from any other Western report. What it said was that China was in denial about the virus, which you could also accuse the USA of, and then it said it acted too little and too late, and because of this, it is now paying the price. Well, you could also say that of the USA. But then it went one step further, and it said, well, an even bigger danger to the world from China is China's financial markets.
All right, let's bring in Tony Gosling. Mr. Gosling, weigh in on the issue for us as well. Our correspondent Stephen Rebay believes that these are tit-for-tat and retaliatory measures. How far do you think that will go? And also, if you may, please give us your thoughts on another issue that Stephen just brought up, is that China is subject to biased media coverage.
Well, I think it's quite clear that the West and China media outlets increasingly as your propaganda outlets. I don't think that there's any unbiased coverage really on it. Both sides are pushing their own agenda in the face of lies. Sometimes most of those lies come from the United States. This is what's now known in the circles as psychology. I was reading a fascinating article. He's absolutely right. What's going on is not just propaganda. It's what they call hybrid war. The idea between the United States and China is a trade war. But there are other aspects to it, of course. So cyber warfare too, there's been all sorts of spats over that. The idea that Huawei technology is being used to there's a general there. But also we're seeing increasingly the potential now, and some Chinese officials have said this in the last few days, the potential that so this is what Pepe means, and this is what people are now seeing as a form of hybrid warfare. So that the idea really here being that it's not just like the old style fighting war. There's lots and lots of aspects to this, and of course, yes, the China is being blamed for everything that the Wall Street Journal would attack China when China has actually shown ways to deal. Is an insult, but it shouldn't be a reason to blame. A provocation. This article, by the way, is owned by Rupert Murdoch. He's also known for quite a lot of racism in his newspapers. Certainly, we in the UK have had to cope with Murdoch racism a lot, and that's exactly what I think he's done here. But the Chinese, I think, should be a little bit wiser and not react. It's very difficult for them to do so because of the expulsion by the United States. All of these, by the way, all of the expulsions from the US by China have been from the state agency, and the various outlets are all just part of. But this is, I would suggest, is underlying much of this is information warfare. There's a fight now for the hearts and minds of the people of the world as to who is the decent, moral, and who is the evil one in the war between China. This is just another aspect of a much, much wider struggle.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to leave it there. Thanks a lot. The coming war on China, which I would recommend everybody Thank you, Tony.
watch.
All right. That was our correspondent, Stephen Rebay, joining us from Beijing. Also, thanks to investigative journalist Tony Gosling. And with that, it brings us to an end here on this edition of Press TV's News Review. Stay tuned, though. There's plenty more to come. Bye for now.